Welcome to Go For Side Effects. I'm your host, Kevin Simon. You all know my co-host, John. John, how you doing?
Hello?
Hi, Dr. Golomb. How are you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
We're doing good. We are live right now. We're bringing you up, and I know you got some fascinating research. I also have Wade, Renard, and I have John and myself on. And
Great.
and so let's get into the good news.
Great.
So, what have you been working on?
Well, I think what I thought I would talk today about is our membrane findings, which I've probably alluded to before, but we have fully analyzed our membrane data and also gene expression findings that are pointers to membranes. And we even have new data in a different population. I don't know if your listeners have heard about the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, February 2023, that released a bunch of toxins that were then burned in a quote unquote controlled vent and burn, which is kind of like a burn pit. And what we're finding is that the knowledge that we've learned from Gulf War illness is incredibly important because it served as pointers to what we're seeing there. It's totally different chemicals. It's the same illness profile. And we used what we'd learned in Gulf War veterans to look at what's going on there to see how much matches. And we also figured we could learn from veterans to help East Palestine and learn from East Palestine to potentially help veterans. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'll kind of start by mentioning that at the beginning, and hopefully I'll remember at the end, that if there are affected Gulf War veterans listening in, we hope you will contact us at golombresearch@ucsd.edu. You can also visit our website at golombresearchgroup.org. We have 3 active Gulf War illness studies right now. The physician attitude survey study, where people can share their bad and good experiences with doctors related to their Gulf War illness. A genetic study that we're exceptionally excited about because of new things that we're learning. And then, perhaps most importantly, our coenzyme Q10 treatment trial, which is ongoing right now. This is the replication study that is under an FDA investigational new drug approval, so that if we are able to get enough people in the study and if we replicate the finding of benefit with coenzyme Q10, there can then be an indication. Gulf War illness could be an indication for CoQ10 use, which we hope would mean that CoQ10 could be paid for. In one of our recent pilot treatment studies, about a third of the veterans that reach out to us were taking CoQ10 because a lot of veterans find that it really helps them, but they can't get it paid for, and it's not an inexpensive supplement. So the reason we really hope people will participate in this study is that it might help get this treatment, assuming it again appears effective, to actually be paid for veterans. We're accepting people whether they're currently taking coenzyme Q10 or not. People who are taking CoQ10 have a choice of either doing a washout and then beginning the study, or if they really don't feel they can do a washout, they can actually just transition directly into being randomized. So that's the most important, I think, study that we have going on, because it could mean availability of a beneficial treatment, assuming again that benefit is supported again, paid for Gulf War veterans.
I
So
really
I thought I
hope
want to.
I really hope that this goes through and it gets done, and if we can figure out exactly, that, and this helps and it goes through the studies, and this is why I say it's very important for everybody to do research. I know a lot of people out there don't like the research side because they don't feel like things are going to get done. But as I tell them, don't think about yourself, think about your kids, because that's the next generation that's going to come up behind us.
Yeah, you are right, but you can think about yourself too. So as I think about all of the health conditions that have been reported to be elevated in Gulf War veterans, which is everything from hypertension and cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, migraine headaches. I'm blocking on lots of them, but I've looked them all up, and almost every one, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, um, almost every one, there's actually evidence that CoQ10 like reduces that problem. It cuts death rate in heart failure patients in half in people of European descent in a big study conducted in Scandinavia. It cuts risk of heart attack in two studies. It cuts risk of migraine. It cuts risk of hypertension. So all these problems that are secondary, quote, comorbidities that are shown to be elevated and that are expected to contribute to risk of like serious adverse events, heart attacks, strokes, etc., um, might also be benefited along with potentially risk of conditions like cancer because um, uh, mitochondrial impairment leads to oxidative stress, which is a quote mutagen and hence carcinogen. It may confer benefit to you, and B, as you 100% point out, it may confer benefit to understanding things both for your children and grandchildren, and also for others. And really, the most important for the veterans is them. Veterans are the ones that serve their country faithfully and with honor, and we 100% and they 100% deserve the work and expenditures to try to find the things that will be be good for them. But it is also the case that we're finding that the things we've learned in 3.5 decades of study in Gulf War veterans are applicable to other individuals that have complex mixed toxic exposures and complex burned mixed toxic exposures like we're seeing in East Palestine. So this is kind of preliminary, so this is not published yet, and don't uh, hold us to every bit of it. But what we've found is that in East Palestine, in the survey participants that we've had so far, and we're accepting people who do and do not feel like they got sick. But of course, it's more the sick people that are, that are motivated to participate. About 73% of them actually meet Gulf War illness symptom criteria. The ones that do, when we look at our U50-20 score that we developed for Gulf War veterans, that looks at 20 symptoms that were each present on at least 50% of veterans in the prior 2 weeks. For 19 of the 20 symptoms, um, they're present in 45% or more. So within sample to sample difference of the 50%. The only one that was not was tinnitus or ringing ears, and that was probably
Mhm.
two reasons. Our fault. In veterans, we asked it as ringing ears, uh, i.e. tinnitus, and inadvertently on the East Palestine survey, we left off the ringing ears, and we've been informed, not unexpectedly, that a lot of people don't know what tinnitus is. But also, there's data showing that chemicals enhance the risk of subsequent noise-induced hearing loss. And the noise in the military is greater than in East Palestine. There's artillery fire that take off. In spite of that, 35% in East Palestine report tinnitus, almost all of it new post-derailment. We got a call last week from one of the residents saying they talked to 5 people that week who reported new tinnitus. I talked to somebody within the last week there that says their tinnitus is so loud they don't even think it's tinnitus, but that's what the doctors are calling it. So there's plenty of people in East Palestine reporting that as well, but it didn't hit the 50% threshold. But again, probably for both those reasons, the noise factor may be
Right.
important in hitting it. So anyway, and also in Gulf War veterans, we found paradoxically that even though inflammation by HSCRP is the most common abnormal lab marker, most veterans it's normal, but it's most commonly elevated. We see the same thing in East Palestine. In Gulf War veterans, we found that rather than higher inflammation predicting more severe illness, it predicted less severe illness. And we're seeing the same thing again in East Palestine. So really, all of the objective and subjective lessons that we're learning we're hoping that this can accelerate and help for other groups that have mixed toxic exposures, and we're hoping that that will in turn mean that attention can come back to Gulf War veterans because they're such an important group to learn from now. There's a much bigger number, 700,000 were deployed compared to, East Palestine has about 4,000 residents. So there's much more ability to learn the important lessons about the elevated comorbidities by studying Gulf War veterans. And now we know that it will not only hopefully help Gulf War veterans and their families, but has prospects to help other groups as well.
I see. I think that's fantastic. And I know, you talk about, tinnitus in the ears. I know I have that bad. The ringing in my ears are so loud that, I mean, it just seems like it gets worse and worse. But I do know Wade had a couple questions that he wanted
Yeah,
to ask you.
great.
Yes, ma'am. So I spoke with you several different times in the last couple of years, but my first question is on the COQ10 study. So if an individual has proper levels that they obtain from dieting, um, will your study or taking a supplement, is that going to benefit them, or if their levels are already at whatever your recommended level, like let's say like Genova Labs, would is taking a supplement going to benefit them at all?
I think the answer is probably yes. And here's the thing. So it's been shown that kind of no matter what the mitochondrial impairment is, CoQ10 helps to bypass that impairment and helps support energy production. So, in a normal, healthy person, there may be a level of coenzyme Q10 that is adequate, but as mitochondrial function is more impaired, higher levels of CoQ10 may be needed. What we saw in our first CoQ10 study, the smaller one, was the greater the rise in the blood level of CoQ10 in that individual, the greater the benefit to objectively measured physical function using the time chair rise measure. So the more the CoQ10 level increased, no matter what it was at baseline, the more the individual benefited. It wasn't the level, it was the increase that seemed to matter in that study.
So
Um,
so we're
so
not
the
really
short answer is we don't know for sure. What, go ahead.
I'm gonna say so basically we're not really finding out what causes the mitochondrial dysfunction. We're trying to treat it or increase the mitochondrial output with the COQ10.
Yeah, the mitochondrial output, and when mitochondria are are damaged and not producing energy properly, they also produce more free radicals, which produces a range of secondary injuries. It increases autoimmunity. It impairs blood flow. It uh, increases programmed cell death, which then contributes to the inflammation and coagulation activation, and also in turn further aggravates risk of autoimmunity by exposing the cell contents to the immune system. Um, that the weakening that is caused by the mitochondrial impairment weakens the upper airway dilator muscle so that people are getting in less oxygen, which then further impairs cell energy and actually has been shown to contribute to cell energy impairment another way, besides the fact that it's reducing oxygen levels, which are a 13, actually a 15-fold multiplier in how much ATP you make per glucose molecule. It also actually leads the blood volume to contract, to be lesser. And what that means is that, fewer of the small capillaries are getting any blood, and then the cells that are supplied with blood by those capillaries aren't getting any blood or oxygen or glucose or nutrients or antioxidants. So there's kind of a set of downstream energy impairment consequences that arise from the original mitochondrial impairment. And in terms of why that original mitochondrial impairment occurs, it turns out that virtually every chemical causes mitochondrial impairment as one of its toxicity mechanisms, and often as a primary toxicity mechanism. People think of, uh, you know, uh, sarin and organophosphates and and carbamate pesticides and like TB. They think of the acetylcholinesterase inhibition, but in fact, that twin oxidative stress and mitochondrial impairment, each of which cause each other, we know that it's so important because in animal studies, if you give a high quality mitochondrial protective antioxidant either just before or just after exposure, it protects against both mortality in the animals, meaning death, and also chronic health consequences. So even though people say, oh, it's the acetylcholinesterase inhibition, and even though that's not untrue, in fact, the evidence of what helps protect against the problems is actually stronger for these oxidative and cell energy mechanisms than it is for the acetylcholine related mechanism. And similarly with statin cholesterol lowering drugs, people think, oh, it's lowering cholesterol, but in fact, there's data showing that for a lot of people, statins are antioxidant, but for a subset, they're pro-oxidant. And that subset is generally the people that have conditions tied to mitochondrial impairment. And like for statins, cholesterol, not only statins block cholesterol production, but they block CoQ10 production. And since cholesterol is what transports fat-soluble antioxidants, including CoQ10 to tissue, people with more mitochondrial impairment are more likely to, um, by losing that CoQ10 protection, they're the people who end up having their mitochondrial problems unmasked, which then in turn produces more free radicals or oxidative stress. And the data are that it's the people that have the increase in oxidative stress that have the muscle and other problems. So again and again, even for acetaminophen, there's data showing that CoQ10 protects against acetaminophen liver injury for sort of drug after drug after drug after drug and toxin after toxin after toxin after toxin. It's these mechanisms that are important. And it's not just the fact that the character of illness in Gulf War veterans pointed to mitochondrial mechanisms to us, the fact that it's multiple symptoms spanning many organs with an emphasis on brain and muscle. Those are the quote, energy demanding, quote, post-mitotic, meaning they've done most of their dividing organs. And so they're hit the hardest when there's energy impairment. And that's what we see with Gulf War veterans. It's the fatigue, which is low energy, plus the cognitive, mood, neurological, and then muscle symptoms that are predominant. In fact, those are the three CDC, criteria basically for Gulf War illness. And then also like the variable latency to symptom onset, where people at least 40% of the elevated symptoms in Gulf War veterans, according to one report, arose at least a year after people returned from the Gulf. So that's also classic for mitochondrial problems, that there's variable latency to symptom onset. So all these things pointed to mitochondria. And then also, if you think about it, the fact that different Gulf War veterans had different exposures. Some had a lot of pesticide exposure, other people didn't. Some had, lots of vaccines, other people didn't. Some had the permethrin impregnated uniforms, other people didn't. Some had the chemical agent with compound paint, other people didn't. And yet what we see is that, these field data are irrespective of what the particular balance of chemicals were. There's this classic profile of health problems that emerges in study after study after study. And in our muscle biopsy study that we published in 2023, we showed that irrespective of what the complement of exposures were, it was the degree of mitochondrial impairment in our muscle biopsy that was related to the degree of severity of illness.
Now,
Okay, so that's what I was going to ask you, because I was going to ask you about the muscle. So if you take a sample, like I know you did your study on your mitochondrial dysfunction by your samplings, correct?
Uh-huh.
So if you take a sample from myself, Kevin, and John, you can't tell, and you see that we have mitochondrial dysfunction. You can't tell by each one of us what that dysfunction, what it was caused from, correct?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so my next question is, when the last time you used, and this isn't gotcha questions, this is just for clarification questions.
Yeah.
So the last time we spoke, you turned me on to your report on your 10-year anniversary on the statin drugs.
Okay.
And I'm sure that probably not very many people are aware of it. I'm a geek like this. This is when we were discussing my issue with statin drugs and talking about the reduction of the CoQ10. But part of the adverse effects of long-term, and this is information for veterans who might be taking statin drugs, particularly how do you say, the atorvastatin? Long-term side effects, adverse effects, fatigue, cognitive problems, gastrointestinal, neurological, sleep problems, glucose levels, muscle pain, and mitochondrial dysfunction. Does
Yep,
that sound familiar to anybody?
exactly. And I'm going to actually confess here, when we started studying statins, they were the number one and number two best-selling prescription drugs in the United States. And, to say that there was hostility to work on, to mention that they even had adverse effects is to understate the case. And there was no will to look at adverse effects of those agents, and there remains very little will to do so. But it was actually that work that led us, even though nobody was willing to listen to it on statins, we understood what was going on with statins. And that is what pricked up my ears with Gulf War veterans. It was exactly what you say. Wow, we see fatigue and cognitive and muscle and whatever with statins, how shockingly similar this is. The difference is that with statins, it's typically the case, not always, that when you withdraw the drug, because the problem is substantially mediated through the reduction in CoQ10 while you're taking the drug, and then the reduction in transport of the CoQ10 and other fat soluble vitamins from the lower cholesterol. Now, that can lead to mitochondrial injury, and so our data are that when people get an adverse effect, the recovery is often short of complete. And then people can ratchet down with multiple cycles, and the data on peripheral neuropathy are basically the longer you take it, the higher the risk. So there probably is some, toxicity that is cumulative over time, but the basic thing with statins is that a lot of it is reversible, which is not equally true with the mitochondrial impairment that arises from a lot of other chemicals, and specifically, um, for many of the Gulf War chemicals.
Okay, so I have a question now. I got a question. So, like Dr. Glum, I just want everybody to really understand that she has been doing this for us since the 1990s. She has been probably our number one researcher out there that has really spoke up for us. And back in the 1990s, I mean, y'all don't believe me? Go on YouTube, you can find it. But with that being
Yep.
said, it's true. It is true. But with
Yeah, I remember people saying, "Oh, we'll never know. We can never figure
right,
it out." And I'm saying, "Yes, we can. We can figure it out. You can do animal
exactly.
studies to show that these chemicals cause these problems while you're doing chemical studies to show, what markers are altered. You can figure it out. You should figure it out. It's real. It's not in their heads, etc." Yeah.
Yeah, so go back into the 1990s, go and look at Go for Research advisory boards, and you'll see her in front of the committees. But with that being said, like I take 600 milligrams of Lyrica
Uh huh.
along with 100 milligrams of Primidone. And
Mhm.
along with that, I also take an Effexor.
Mhm.
And I mean, that's just so I can walk. And,
Right.
but it does not clear up my head.
Yeah. So let me ask. Are you on sleep apnea treatment?
I take I do a machine, yes.
Okay. Because that is like such an important downstream factor that happens when there's mitochondrial problems. Again, it weakens the upper airway dilator, and then that means that there are episodes of inadequate oxygen, and then that in turn leads to what's called reoxygenation injury. When the oxygen is low, it's damaging cells, especially in the brain, because the brain is about 2% of the body weight, and it uses about 20% of all the oxygen in the whole body.
Okay.
And so those cells can't go without the full amount of oxygen. And then if you've got mitochondrial impairment already, then even a small drop in oxygen that a normal person would tolerate produces an outsized effect. So mitochondrial impairment weakens the muscles that hold open the airway, and then that leads to episodes of oxygen dipping, and that further weakens those muscles. So one of the most important things to protect, cognition, mood, sleep apnea is tied to all the problems that mitochondrial impairment is tied to because they both are impairing cell energy. And because that sleep apnea consequence of mitochondrial impairment can further impair cell energy so much, and again, lead to oxidative stress, that free radical injury that antioxidants help protect against during what's called reoxygenation injury. During the episodes when the oxygen comes back up after going down, that produces its own problem. So often, one of the things that can be most important is for people making sure that their oxygen levels at night are adequately supported to help protect against all the problems. So when oxygen levels go down, that often leads to an increased release of adrenaline because, it's a threat to your cell survival, it's a threat to your body's survival, and the body releases adrenaline as a fight or flight. And then that leads to anxiety during the daytime and for some people, nightmares at night. In fact, I'll just comment that I've long thought that a lot of people are getting false diagnoses of PTSD, especially through screening tests, because a lot of cell energy problems will be misconstrued as PTSD problems, like nightmares. And in fact, there are now studies showing that nightmares, quote unquote, from PTSD are often resolved with CPAP treatment, which tells you that the nightmares are not from the PTSD. They're from the cell energy impairment, leading to that adrenaline, which is an anxiety promoting hormone. And that adrenaline is produced because the body wants you to wake up so you start breathing again. But that adrenaline for some people will lead to anxiety during the day and ironically can even lead to insomnia. So a lot of times sleep apnea will cause hypersomnolence where people, sleep during the daytime, et cetera, but it can also cause insomnia because of that adrenaline, release problem. So
Okay.
in addition to, whatever other cell energy supports and antioxidants, I would just, have you sort of check with your doctor and make sure that you're adequately treated for the sleep apnea. People with mitochondrial impairment need, they basically, again, they can't afford the level of dips in oxygen that would be fine for other people. And doctors don't typically understand that. They think it's one size fits all for oxygen levels, and it's not.
Okay. All right, man. That explains that. Wade, what was your other question?
Oh no, I was just gonna say that when we were talking about the statins, so if wouldn't you want to differentiate between someone who's having side effects from long-term side effects from statins from somebody that's actually suffering from, let's say chemical exposures? So wouldn't it be like
Yeah,
you'd want to you
you
get
bring
them
up a
out?
really important point. And so we're kind of struggling a little bit in our treatment study. We asked, like, when did your symptoms start and what were your original symptoms? And for a lot of veterans with gulfs illness, their symptoms started, in somewhere between 1990 and 1995 when they were in their 20s, and it didn't make sense for them to suddenly have a lot of symptoms. But there are people who were in the Gulf War whose symptoms started in 2020. And then is that Gulf War illness? They may meet Gulf War illness criteria because the criteria they're agnostic as to how long out the symptoms started. And, if they were already on medicines like statins, is that the basis of of the symptoms they're having? And that is,
That's exactly my
that
point.
is and it's a very good point. And so I don't know if other investigators look at date of onset. For most of our studies, we prefer and sometimes exclusively allow people whose symptoms started early, at most in the first decade after the Gulf. It's a little we're struggling with that with the CoQ10 trial because technically diagnoses for Gulf War illness don't exactly consider that. So we are kind of addressing that on a case by case basis. If there were some symptoms that seem clearly Gulf War illness related that began early on, then generally we're accepting people even though some of their symptoms may be arising from these other factors.
And it is possible to get off your cholesterol meds, isn't it?
Yes, but like I don't want to get in trouble by telling people to, you
Well, I
know,
mean, I mean, how would one go about getting off your cholesterol meds the good way?
well, I would say first off, find a provider that shares your attitudes about health, if that's your preference. And then when I was um, kind of advising a lot of people that were having problems with cholesterol lowering drugs, I did generally recommend that they go on CoQ10 for a couple weeks first before they stop the drug. And the reason is that statins have both pro-oxidant effects by many mechanisms and antioxidant effects by many mechanisms, but the antioxidant effects can go away first. And for a small subset of people, that leaves them with a time where the pro-oxidant bad effects can actually worsen when they stop the statin. And very rarely, because of that, people will actually get worse. Their problems that are due to statins can actually worsen when they stop them unless they're protecting against that initial phase where the antioxidant effects have gone away, but the pro-oxidant effects are lingering. So that was generally my recommendation. I can't advise people to go off their cholesterol lowering drug, but I will say that I am nervous when people have conditions with mitochondrial impairment and they go on drugs that can worsen mitochondrial impairment. I think I might have mentioned to you, we've heard from one Gulf War veteran who experienced both rhabdomyolysis, which is this condition of massive muscle breakdown where the broken down muscle can overwhelm the kidneys and cause kidney failure and death. And the other main feared statin muscle complication, which is necrotizing autoimmune myositis. Necrotizing means the cells are dying, and autoimmune is self explanatory. And those problems both occurred in this one poor veteran who had, again, like two horrible feared muscle complications of statins occurring in one person. And that's not the norm in Gulf War veterans, but I've never heard it in anybody else getting both those problems. Um, so, in general, like our 2008 statin adverse effect review paper talks about how, look, all these conditions that are tied to higher risk of statin complications, they're all conditions that are statistically tied to mitochondrial impairment or else to like higher blood levels of statins. So all the risk factors are either things that impair clearance of statins, um, or increase dose, basically, which is like, they either lead to more statin in the body or they're associated with mitochondrial impairment, which is the setting where statins, by reducing antioxidant transport and CoQ10 production, those are the people where, when you had enough CoQ10 and enough cholesterol to transport antioxidants, you might have been able to bypass any low level mitochondrial problems you might have had. But when you withdraw those protections, they can be unmasked, which is another way of saying produced, and then people develop these adverse effects. So um, I'm
That's
not advocating that people stop their drugs, but I am, but it is a good idea for doctors as well as others to be aware that these these factors are involved in who's at risk of complications from statins.
that I tell you what, it's always fascinating talking to you. I mean,
Well, thank you for your patience because I know sometimes I like probably don't break it down to as simple as I should, but
well,
let
that's
me
why
know if
we
I'm
can go back and re-listen to it again. And see,
yeah.
that's a good thing about this. And so I know that Jason Johnson had a question, and I hope he puts it up again because I can't scroll up there. But I mean, you've been fighting for us for a long time, and I really appreciate everything that
Well,
you have done for us and all the research that you're doing. And I
Well,
mean,
I appreciate that, and none of it would be possible without the amazing Gulf War veterans that participate in our work. And I got to say, they're wonderful people, and we love and admire them tremendously.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I tell you what, I I give it to the Gulf War vets too for who participate like Wade. You know, he gets out there and he goes to every study you can dream of. He's our research.
Guinea pig.
Yeah, and everything. And but that's what it takes. You
Yeah,
know, for people to really get out there and and work together as a team and not fight it, but work with it as you know, that's how I look at it. And
right. Yeah.
I mean, is there any more? I know you want to talk more about the other studies that's going on, but I thought that was the main one we want to focus on, and we're good. I want to do another one with you in March,
Okay.
if you would like. Bring you
I would
back
love to.
on,
Yeah.
and uh, and and I would like that. Now, Jason's question here. He wanted me to ask you this, and do you know about C15 and fatty 15?
C15 and what was the other thing?
Fatty 15.
Fatty 15. I do not.
Okay. And so that's he wanted to know that question, and I told him I would make sure I asked that on the air.
Okay, I can look that up for next
Okay.
time we talk.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. Because he would love to have an answer from you on that.
Okay,
And
great.
I and he said he can email you also. And
I would
then
love that. Yeah, because that way I can
okay.
be sure I understand the question right.
Yeah, and I
That'd be
know he's
fine.
got your email. But Dr. Glump, thank you for coming on. Wade, thank you for coming on. John, thank you for coming on. I want to thank everybody listening. Dr. Glum, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Well, I didn't know if you wanted me to review any of what we found in our membrane study, but if it's kind of if we're kind of wrapping up, we can just save that for next time.
Yes, I'm going to save that for next time because I got a lot of questions on that. And
Okay,
so,
great.
and that could take a whole 45 more minutes with me and
Okay,
everything. All right.
great.
Well, thank you.
All right, thanks so much. Okay, take care.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Bye bye. But I want to thank Wade, I want, and John for coming on, everybody listening. Uh, you know, at the bottom, y'all can contact me at Kevin Simon at go4sideeffects.com. We scrolled across the Nova's phone number for doing their research also. So we have several groups out there studying research, and I think that's very important, to each and every one of us to get out there and participate in. And Wade, don't worry. The next time she's on, you're definitely going to be on because I know you're going to have like 30 more questions for her. I think it's great because them are the questions that I would never asked. And that's why we bring Wade on. He's our research expert. And me and John are the host and the co host. But man, I want everybody to have a great night. Y'all go check out our Patreon account at Go for Side Effects and everything. And, go to YouTube. And that's the one thing I will really want to work on. Subscribe to YouTube, like and share. We're trying to build that page. We're going live there now. And so we're trying to build that up also. And so everybody have a great night. Thank you for joining us.